All right, so it's time to move on to our next session. I'd like to welcome Mr. Cian George Llanto from Singapore. Hi, Cian. So if you can hear me, kindly unmute yourself and load your presentation. I'll confirm once I see it. So in the meantime, Cian, uploads his presentation, a brief about what he's going to talk about. So the session is about the key pillars necessary to build up the pipeline capabilities and move from pilot to a fully functional center of excellence. About Sane has more than 8 years of experience in the IT industry and as well experience in leading and setting up various RPA automation models for logistics, BPO, petrochemical, finance, and insurance. Currently, he is a solution architect in Ingram Micro, Australia. He has more than 5 years experience in designing and architecting cost-effective and scalable RPA solutions that create a sustainable competitive advantage, unlock synergies, leverage untapped efficiencies, align RPA for differentiation, and use innovation to increase or create a point of variance. He is experienced across all various tools that Sankara mentioned in his slides, like UiPath, Cryon, Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism, and Power Automate. So lots to hear from you, Cian. So over to you now. I can see the presentation. I could see you before. I don't see your video now. Okay, I see you now. All right, now over to you. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, Abisala. And yeah, so basically what I'll be talking about today would be RPA to the next level. So in the next 30 minutes, I'm just not sure why. Yeah, okay. So in the next 30 minutes, we'll be talking about RPA as a journey, pitfalls of RPA, just to be able to move through how we are able to introduce the success factors, as well as the RPA journey to the next level with the COE. And then within this one, we're actually going to tackle 5 different pillars, which would be on governance, people, technology, process, and organizational adoption. So when we talk about RPA, I would like to emphasize as early as now that some companies actually consider RPA as a project. But in fact, you can actually see that there is an overall RPA development lifecycle involved. And I will say that for me, it is actually a journey and not just a project, because after the deployment phase, you have to consider what will happen next, how you're actually going to ramp up your RPA capability. Are you always going to be dependent on vendors or system integrators and the likes? How are you actually going to improve the process? So those are the common things that are actually missed out by some, but not all organizations when they actually start their RPA journey. Typically, based on the EY survey, Ernst & Young survey that they actually did a few years back, 30 to 50% of the RPA projects actually fail at the onset or do not scale up. And I just wanted to highlight a few things. So basically, let's talk about the pitfalls of RPA. So my idea is you have to walk first before you can run. So you have to be able to know what you should be avoiding. And it's basically the first one, selecting the process or selecting the right process. So some organizations, what they do is they just select the process and then, they think that it would be okay, that this is the good process and so on, without technically considering whether they did an initial process assessment, a feasibility study, or consider the complexity. Another one would be doing their RPA on their own. Though, if you guys could remember, when RPA started, the most common slogan that they have would be, anyone can build the RPA. It's very simple to use. It's drag and drop capability. But we all know, and it has been proven, and you don't actually see it often now, that vendors don't say that you can do it on your own. Because in fact, there are really a lot of complexities that have to be considered, a lot of considerations that have to be factored in. So if ever a company would do it on their own, they have to be able to get at least some proper training and enablement from systems integrator, from experts, and basically they need to be able to follow the standards and best practices. So when we talk about RPA as well, it's process automation. So some sometimes we forget that it is the process owners who are actually dealing with the processes. That there are subject matter experts that will be able to tell us the ins and out of the process. That these process owners should be involved on the onset, so that we can actually make sure that there is a success in the project. Because at the end of the day, they are the ones who know the process rules. They know the if and else of each of the things that would be happening. They know which exceptions should be catered for and which are not. So these are some things that you really have to factor in, that process owners' involvement is very vital in any RPA journey. We also know that we have to set the expectations properly. So when I worked as a systems, I worked for a systems integrator before. I also see how other sales people work, how sales guys actually sometimes overpromise, and of course I've also seen some expectations from the customers. Some are over optimistic and some are over pessimistic. That sometimes they feel that every RPA can do everything, and then there are some who actually just don't trust it because they are maybe worried about something about losing their jobs and the likes. So there are various people, and at the end of the day, we have to be able to set the expectations properly, because that is something that will make or break a project as well. So yeah. Besides this one, you have poor strategies and tools. So if you're not able to identify the correct product strengths that you would need, whether you immediately use OCR for a new project and so on, whether your tool or your RPA product is able to do native integration as well as a very strong community base, that is something that sometimes are not factored out. Sometimes customers only rely on the cost of the product and so on. So they have to consider those things. And the next one is they actually treat RPA as a project. That means they're not having a bird's eye view of what will be happening in the next few months, next few years. They commonly change the development team. They're treating RPA as the same as other projects accordingly. They don't do proper testing and not treating RPA as a journey. That is actually one of the common pitfalls. So I've listed also some of the success factors to be able to have an effective implementation. Basically, communication is always key to any project, to any journey that you will be interacting. You define our RASI model. You define who should be involved, who should be included, those things. You also select the right process. That is very important. Selecting the right process will actually let you have a good start in an RPA journey. So basically, the first process is often the make or break in any RPA journey, because that is the one that is actually having the most eyes looking at it and so on. You have to form the right team. You have to have the process owner's commitment. You need to have the correct team members involved. You always should visualize the process as well, where you're actually able to map out the process, the ins and outs, and so on. You identify the test scenarios ahead of time. May it be happy flow, negative scenarios, and uncommon cases that you are encountering. And of course, during the development, you also have to map out whatever items have not been mentioned for testing. You prepare the environment ahead of time. You ensure that there is a proper working environment. Don't cut corners, no shortcuts. For development, UAT, and production, you have to consider these things as well. You have to prepare the environment prior to deployment date, because that will actually cause you delays as well. 3 tests, test, unit testing, integration testing, and UAT is very important prior to deployment. And of course, deployment and hypercare, you should always consider hypercare phase. That is when you actually complete one project, for example. But as we mentioned, we are actually considering RPA as a journey. And for me, what is a successful RPA journey? It's basically a journey that has an organizational adoption, where you're also able to onboard IT team and, of course, eventually have an in-house RPA capability. Whenever I work with customers, or when I was a systems integrator, I always mention to them that yes, you would need some support from a systems integrator now, but would you want to be able to be dependent on a systems integrator in the future? would you not want to be able to support your own processes in the future? These are key factors that we always consider whenever an organization is successful in their journey. Is they are able to provide support, they're able to tackle their issues, the process issues first before actually reaching out to the vendor. That is where we actually consider the Center of Excellence framework. And I mentioned we're going to tackle 5 pillars here. Let's start with governance. And typically, when you talk about governance, the first thing you will be considering would be the types of COEs. There are 3 options: centralized, hybrid, and federated. Centralized being you have one RPA COE across the organization. You also have a hybrid COE where you have a centralized, a main RPA COE, and then you have smaller RPA COEs. But at the end of the day, they're still discussing with the center or the main COE based on certain standards and procedures. There is also another one, which is independent or federated COE. Basically, each business unit is actually having the COE on its own. And definitely, I see a lot of concerns with federated ones because there won't be any standards within the whole organization because each business unit is actually holding on to their own COE setup. Personally, I propose to the customers based on, of course, the size would be for them to actually have their own centralized COE initially. So I typically suggest having a centralized COE within the start of their RPA journey in order to build the foundation, to be able to create a consistency, to be able to practically create something that is common within a group of people and eventually rolling it out to a hybrid COE. Because at the end of the day, if you have a centralized COE, you can only reach so much. You can only do so much because you are limited to a specific number of team members or a specific group of people. So once you have stabilized that centralized COE, you actually can shift them to a hybrid COE model, which will actually enable the business units also to act on their own, of course, with the guidance of those people who are coming from the centralized COE. We also have a few governance consideration when you actually set this up. So when you have a COE, you'll be considering certain governance procedures, such as coming up with a process selection criteria, coming up with the standards and best practices, coming up with a development approach, how you would like the testing to be done in this development, coming up with an approach to divide processes into smaller components and the likes. Deployment considerations, how you're going to deploy to a customer or how you're going to deploy internally. So will there be an IT team involved? Will there be the process owners involved and so on? How you're actually going to operate the processes. You also consider credentials management, who will be making sure that these credentials are stored, who will be knowing the credentials and the likes and so on. You're going to consider also how you'll be handling the sensitive information, as well as the architecture or your scaled up architecture as well. Besides this, you also consider reporting and metrics. Typically reporting and metrics, these are always considered by the stakeholders or the top management, and this will actually help you guys drive the COE as well. If you're able to produce certain matrices to be able to maximize the RPA performance, calculate business inputs and ROIs, come up with reports that would actually make them see the potential of their RPA, and of course, you're able to with the reports you're actually able to forecast anomalies that are happening as well and prevent it from happening. With proper governance, I actually came up with a delivery methodology that I always consider for COEs. This is actually a double agile loop COE methodology. It's basically you're having business requirements coming in continuously. You're always considering the initial assessment. You're actually going to consider a go or no-go criteria, and you confirm the planning. You're going to plan the process, and you actually try to deliver it. And in the realization stage, you're actually seeing that it actually opens up more things such as requirements gathering, solutioning, development, testing, deployment, and maintenance. So that is basically how you're actually going to do the overall project. But the COE team is actually continuously doing what is on the top, or the top agile loop, while the development team is actually doing the business as usual of developing the products. And once you actually delivered it, you always have to review and evaluate whether this process is still most efficient. Are there anything that we can improve on, and so on? And that will actually come into another request type, which will actually allow you to enhance processes, perform continuous improvements in the process accordingly. We also, of course, have people. So in any RPA COE, you need to have the correct team structure. This may not be the same with others, but basically you need to have a project program sponsor. You need to have an RPA champion. You need to have the corresponding project managers and business analysts, and basically the overall team. I won't dig deep in detail, but basically you need to provide or to have a correct team in place in order for your RPA journey to be very successful and be able to scale up. When we talk about people, basically you have the governance team, which I just shown you earlier. So they are actually overall responsible for the framework, the governance things that would be involved in your journey. You align and define the roles and responsibilities of each team member. You also identify the hierarchy within the organization. Who is the escalation point? Who is the 80-20 or the backup of each other? You actually need to provide the skills and competencies for each one. You don't just assign these people, you need to enable them, you determine the criteria, and be able to identify the right person for the job. And if, let's say, you feel that this person is doing this, but still not that efficient in doing it, then you need to provide certain enablement for that person to be able to help you scale up. And of course, a proper onboarding plan for each of the team members, or each of the people within the COE. What trainings they have to take, what criteria that have to be satisfied, and so on. When we talk about technology, it's mainly the tools that you are actually using. And I would like to quote what David Allen mentioned. If the only tool you have is a hammer, it's very hard to eat spaghetti. I think you guys would agree with me on that one. So what I'm trying to say here is you need to get to ensure that the tools that you are using are actually the suitable tools for your RPA journey. And earlier, Sunkara was mentioning the things that you have to consider for your process, for your RPA tools. And yeah, so from my side, it would be, of course, the training that is available for the people who is actually going to use that tool. For example, you have the UIPath Academy, right? The ease of implementation and native integrations the platform has, how easy it is to use the platform for, let's say, citizen developers. For developers, are there drag and drop functionalities? Are there recording functionalities? Does it have intelligence features? The speed of the product. You also have a continuous product support. You have to consider that the product should be supported accordingly by the vendor, and not just something that you deploy something and then it will be unsupported at the end of the year because there is a new release that is not backwards compatible. You have to consider those things. The cost of ownership, in the sense that how much you would actually need to be able to start your journey and to scale it up. The compatibility between platforms, integrations available, the scalability. If you have something that is attended bot, will you be able to run it on unattended bot in the future? Will you be able to have an unattended process? Will you be able to work with OCRs, with documents in the future? Will you be able to have apps capability or functionality? Those things. A key factor would be the community base. And yeah, so this is something that must be considered, as well as whether the product is actually considered in the governance and compliance within the organization, may it be a big organization or a small organization. from my point of view, I've been using UiPath for almost 6 years now, and definitely it is one of the platforms that I would consider when talking about basically when talking about the RPA tool that will actually be able to satisfy the needs of an organization. Where because UiPath you actually have different pillars, or you actually have a series of products that are available to you at your disposal from the discovery stage to build stage to managing stage to running and engaging with the users. So basically from process discovery, you actually have the certain products. From build stage, you have various types of UiPath studios that are available. You're able to manage and deploy projects with the use of UiPath Orchestrator. Running the bots may be attended, unattended, and the likes. And of course, the robots are able to engage with you. So no matter uh, who the person is within the organization, within the COE, there is actually a product that is made available by UiPath to the different personas that are available. May they be the COE leads who are actually governing the overall RPA solution. You actually have a collaborative platform that you can leverage on when you actually try to discover the project. When coming up with PDDs, you have the UiPath task capture. Whenever you're trying to identify what other processes you might need, you actually have UiPath process mining and task mining and so on. For building, as I've mentioned, you have the studio family, you have document understanding that will allow you to scan images and documents, and then and then allow the humans to verify. You also have a marketplace and integration that will actually allow you to look for reusable components and so on. And in manage phase or manage pillar, you actually have various options such as orchestrator, test manager, AI fabric, now known as AI center, and UiPath insights for reporting. And engaging will allow the humans to actually work with the robot through chatbots, through action center where human validation is required. For some processes, you have the UiPath assistant as well as UiPath apps. And of course, you have the different deployment options available, may it be on-premise, a hybrid, or a public cloud. For me, the UiPath is a solution that will be able to meet my needs on these things. Let's also talk about the process and how we actually generate the pipeline would be. There would be plenty of different ways that we can consider. Of course, through process discovery, where you can actually have a 3-step process discovery with your users, where you have exploratory workshops first, where you bring in the stakeholders into workshop. You set up a clear objective with them and come up with certain ideas or outcomes that will be able to tell you what are the value of the processes and so on. From there, you're actually able to model those processes that you have shortlisted and perform a gap analysis and create an as-is overview of the process so that you will be able to know that this is the current process and so on, and create a pipeline and come up with an implementation plan. Of course, you'll also be able to do the review afterwards based on the defined process, whether this is really the option. Can we make some changes? Can we make some amendments in this process and formulate the approach that you would be taking? That is for the process discovery. And we actually have various options when it comes to processes, right? You have an opportunity assessment framework where you do what I just mentioned in the previous slide. You also come up with process metrics and KPI calculations for your customers or the within the internally within the organization. Some demand generation activities through RPA awareness sessions, automation flywheel, which I'll be talking about in the next slide, and workshops. You also can come or leverage on internal collaboration platforms or marketplace such as UiPath Automation Hub that actually allows the COE to look at the processes at the same time, allow people in the organization to actually identify some of the processes that they would like to implement and allow the COE team to look at it. You also have pipeline management, of course, which will be prioritizing either based on savings or based on business need. Going back to the automation flywheel, typically, so this one I got from UiPath as well. So the automation flywheel typically talks about when you start your RPA journey and come up with one process for implementation. What the Center of Excellence do is they will actually build it for you. That is why you actually have when you have the centralized Center of Excellence, you're expecting them to build the processes. And what will happen is you're actually providing that automation to the employee for them to use. And you actually showcase this. Don't be shy in showcasing it into a town hall, into a group of people. And employees will use that automation itself. And then they will realize the potential and then eventually come up with another idea to submit to the COE for them to implement. But the good thing is when you actually do the town hall, when you actually showcase it to other people, it doesn't stop there. You actually get other people to consider, oh, I have other processes as well. I have to do this. I have to implement this. And then the best part is some of them, because you also have a low code platform, some of them might actually start building their own tools for using those low code tools and actually submit their ideas to the COE or submit the built automation to the COE. And then the COE governs that, checks that, performs validation, and so on, and then provides that automation to all other employees. And this is actually going to be a cycle. This will be continuously happening within the organization once you do it. So I've attended town halls where we implemented the processes, and then we actually invite team members or business users and process owners to actually speak, and not just systems integrators, because of course it's always easier to believe those who are actually experiencing the product. So there was one process owner, and he was speaking to the group of people, and he said, I'm speaking in front of you right now because there are 2 robots working for me upstairs. And basically, yeah, so it's an automation flywheel initiative that we did. And over the years, we're still sorry, I realized I moved the organization already, but over the years, the company that I was working for, they're still working with that process, with that customer until now. And that was 4 years ago because of this flywheel effect. Let's also talk about organizational adoption. So when you actually mention that the company has adopted to RPA, it's basically you're able to spread RPA awareness. You're able to certify the people or the team involved. This team members in the organization have hands-on exercises so that they can explore the RPA products. You also do assessments, internal RPA trainings, and they can actually come up with a case study. So this is typically when you say a company has adopted or the journey has adopted, the company where you're having the RPA journey has adopted already. I also have this vision of what we call the co-development model, like what I was mentioning earlier. Whenever we work with customers or whenever I work with customers, I always make sure that at the end of the day, they will be self-sufficient. So I've come up with a co-development model approach in a COE, wherein if you look at the first few few columns where you actually have various team members involved, and you actually talk about the processes that are going to be developed, you will notice that the main team members involved in the COE would be coming from the vendor, and this is because sorry for the typo here. Should be higher, but basically you have a total of 6 resources, and majority of the team members should be coming from the vendor. And then as you move across the months, you actually will notice that the end user team members would actually be higher and higher. This is because you're actually continuously training them, and eventually, if the end user team members would actually have more team members working with them, then that would mean that you actually have a successful RPA journey in place. So practically this is the last slide. I noticed that there are a couple of typos there. Apologies for that. I'll modify this prior to sending to you guys. But yeah, that is actually bringing me to the end of my slide. Maybe we can open the floor for some questions if there are any.
Sure. Thank you, Sian, for being time. Yes. So we have the forum open now for any questions that you might have for him. Please feel free to unmute or type it out. I'll assist in reading that out.
Yeah, I have a question. This is Rajesh.
Yes.
Hi, Shri.
Hi, Rajesh.
Thank you for the overview. And I have one question about your last slide. In the
Sure.
last slide, you are saying like the vendor resource will increase over time and the end user will be minimal. Am I right?
So sorry, that was a typo. It should be the
Okay.
other way around. So typically, the end user should increase over time, and then the dependency on the vendor should be lower eventually.
Okay. Okay. Sorry. I think you mentioned it. I differently understood. Thank you. That's fine.
Sorry about that. Yep. Thanks for the question, Rajesh.
Yeah, thank you, Rajesh. Any other question? I don't see a question in the chat box yet. In case we don't have any further question, we'll move on to our next session by thanking Sien for joining. Thank you, Sien, for your
Thank
time.
you. Thank you so much.